Hello, everybody. I'm Brandy Garno, Associate Commissioner at the America East Conference, and thank you for tuning into this Three Pillars Academy episode. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Susan Peal, Director of Governance at the NCAA. Susan has just completed her 19th year at the NCAA, and her career has spanned not just 2 stints at the national office, but a number of campuses, including Winthrop University, Charleston Southern University, and The Ohio State University, where I had the pleasure of first meeting Susan. Most recently, Susan was honored with the Frank Cara Leadership Award, which is the premier award for NCAA compliance professionals. Susan's successful career has allowed her to mentor many up-and-coming professionals, so it's no surprise we reached out to Susan on the topic of resumes and cover letters. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Brandy. It's exciting to join you today. I'm so impressed that the America East Conference offers its student athletes professional development opportunities through its Three Pillars Academy. We have a lot to cover in this session, so I'll jump in and get started. The way I look at resume writing, it's really your personal marketing campaign. This is your advertisement to show all your work experience and why you are the right person for the job. So with your marketing campaign, what will I highlight? Well, we're going to talk about taking your resume to the next level. Your resume is your story, and that's what you want to tell. You also want to measure your success in that story. And most important, you need to communicate a clear and consistent message in your resume. Well, how are we going to break this down in this session? First, we're going to look at formatting and organization of your resume. And then what content do you include? These are like your job responsibilities and skills. Next, what don't you want to include in your resume? And we can't talk about resumes without also discussing cover letters and references. And then I'll touch upon social networks and how that comes into play with your resume. Because a lot of people think the resume is to get the job. The way I look at it is the resume is to get the interview. It's the interview then to get the job. So let's start with formatting and organization. What you want to do, you want to tailor your resume to the actual job description. So for example, let's just say you're looking at 5 different jobs. Really, it's 5 different resumes because every job might be just a little bit different, and you want to be able to convey your skills or your transferable skills to that particular job and what is required as the job description. Next, you want to make sure that you have concise sentences. A resume should not include paragraphs. Really, that sentence should describe your job responsibilities and then how that translates to your actual skills. So keep it simple, keep it very short as far as the sentences. And next, you want to make sure that your resume is easy to browse. You have to think about the recipient of your resume. They're receiving, maybe 100 resumes, and they need to eliminate a lot of those resumes, get it down to maybe 10, maybe 5, and then interview 3 individuals. So how do you do that? Well, no one has that type of time. And so really they are going to browse through your resume the first time and really not look at it in detail until it makes that short list. The next is your font style and your font size. So the way I look at it is keep the font clean and sleek, no fancy fonts. You just want to make sure that it's something that, again, is easy to read, and it should be about 10 to 12 as far as your font size. You don't want it too small because you're trying to cram a lot on your resume, and you don't want the font too large because you're trying to make it look like you have more than what you really do. So keep it in that 10 to 12 font size. So how do you organize your resume? Well, you definitely want to have your name, your phone number, and your email address. And I would still include a mailing address on your resume. Next would be your education. So this would be your undergraduate degree, and if you have completed a postgraduate degree. And then you get into your professional experience. For this is work-related experience. So this is not going to include every job maybe that you've had, throughout your high school, college. Really, I would start with college and any work experience that you have that is more professional. If you have any professional affiliations or associations, I would definitely include that on your resume. And I know many of you volunteer and you have community engagement, so make sure that you definitely place that on your resume. And then some of you might have presentations, accomplishments that you want to highlight. Again, go ahead and place that on your resume. And so that's kind of the order. If you look at what's on the screen: contact information, education, professional experience, professional affiliations and associations, volunteer community, and publications, presentations, and accomplishments. Now let's talk about the content to include on your resume. You want to clearly describe your qualifications and the experiences you have and what's your skill set. So how do you do that? Again, going back to what we talked about previously, make sure it's concise, make sure it's related to the job description. And then you want to make sure your content is in chronological order. So that is present to past. And verbiage is something that I would say when I'm reviewing resumes where most people then have inaccurate verbiage in the resume. So you want to keep it to whatever your current position is. The verb is current, and then past tense for your previous experience. Always make sure everything's accurate, and this is where you should get others definitely reviewing your resume, and make sure that the dates and titles all match up. And you want to limit your resume, that content, and that content, remember, that's your qualifications, skills, and experience. Limit that to about 6 to 7 bullets for each of your positions that you are describing. Any more than that, then people stop reading. I've looked at resumes and I've seen about 20 bullet points, and I stop right about at that 6 or 7 and don't read anymore because it just looks too filled up on the page, and so you really want to keep that limited. All right, let's look at content of your resume. Really, for your content, you want to clearly describe your qualifications, your skills, and your experiences. Going back to what I talked about previously, making sure that is concise but thorough. Then you want to make sure that it's in chronological order. So looking at all your job experience and then current to past. So important is your verbiage that you use. Again, that should be current to past. This is probably the #1 mistake that I see in resumes, is that people forget to change when they have a new job and they add that to the resume. They forget to change the previous job to past tense. And then making sure everything is so accurate on your resume. This is why you should have multiple people review your resume for you. Look at those dates. Make sure everything matches out appropriately in the titles that you are illustrating in your resume, that they are the accurate titles. And the last part about the content are your bullet points. So everything really should be bullet, those sentences that's describing your qualifications and your skills and experience. Those should be bullet points. And really that should just be limited to about 6 to 7 per your job, your position. Any more than that, people stop reading. It just looks like too much on the page.
Susan, this sounds great. I know our student athletes will benefit from this information, whether this is their first time writing a resume or they are trying to update their resume. I did want to elaborate on a point you mentioned, which is that your job duties should be limited to 6 or 7 bullet points. Sometimes that can be really difficult to do when you're trying to clearly convey all the experience that you've gained. Can you give any pointers on how you can limit your content to just the 6 or 7 bullet points?
Great question, Brandy, and a question that I get asked a lot because you really do want to tell your story on your resume and you have a lot to tell. So how do you limit that within those 6 to 7 bullets for each position? And there's a couple different tips that I can show. I'm going to show you a sample resume now that'll be up on the screen. And so this first sample is the sample that does show the 6 to 7 bullet points for each position. So if you're scrolling through, you'll see this is a very clean resume. Again, it's starting with the content that I talked about, the organization, with the name, with the education, and then the work-related experience. But then when you look at that work-related experience, it takes it to that 6 or 7 bullet points, very concise. So what you really want to do is start out with more and then start cutting down some of those bullets and think, how can I illustrate what I want to say within my story without adding too much. And you can do that, and you can see on this sample how for this resume, this was managed. Certainly this resume is a resume for someone who's been in a career for a lengthy time, and so I did want to show you that, because as a student athlete and you're just starting out, I mean, obviously your resume is going to be shorter than this and not as much experience, but within that job description, it still will look very similar to the sample that I'm showing you. The other method that you can use is a second resume that I'll show. And in this sample, this individual had a lot of bullet points, but was able to narrow those bullets down by giving headers for each of the job responsibilities. So that's a way to, when you have, let's say, 20 bullet points, because you want to explain everything, well, you still could do that, but just have just have headers, and under that, you could have various bullet points, the 6 to 7, and then you start with another header, just as you're seeing on the screen with this resume. And this is a little bit of a different resume. Starts out the same way with the with the name, the education, but then it gives an employment history section, and then the actual professional skills and work experience. And like I said, the example there, personnel management, communication, organizational skills, that's your headers, and then what were the job responsibilities under each header. So hopefully by looking at those two different samples, that does help you out in clearly understanding how you can organize your resume and how you can include that content and be able to clearly tell your story through those qualifications, skills, and experience. Last information I'm going to share with you about your resume is what you don't want to do. So as you can see on the screen, there are a lot of don'ts. You don't want to include your work email or phone number. So if you're already employed and you're looking for another position, then you want your personal email, your personal phone number, never your work-related information when you're talking about your contact information. Next would be objective. Now, you might be surprised that I place objective on the don'ts list. But the reason for that is because you can place your objective in the cover letter, and we'll talk about the cover letter next. But this is great information in your objective, but why not place that actually in your cover letter and not on your resume? You want to exclude personal information because this is your professional work experience, and nothing should be personal, such as marital status and age, things like that. Graduation year is an interesting one, whether you should include that on your resume or not. And really, you should not, unless it's in the last 3 years. So for most of you, yes, you will include your graduation year, but eventually you'll remove that from your resume, because really you don't want to ever be discriminated upon by your age, and by having that graduation year, it clearly can show your age. It's great that you might have a 4.0 GPA, but go ahead and leave your GPA off the resume, because certainly if your GPA was a 2.0, you probably wouldn't place that on your resume. So just go ahead and eliminate that off of your resume. Be careful with acronyms. I know that especially in intercollegiate athletics, we use a lot of acronyms, but a lot of people don't know what those acronyms stand for. And so spell everything out. And certainly you can use acronyms, but it's only after you've spelled something out. Place the acronym in parentheses, and then you can use it again. Be careful with what I call grammar goofs. that spell check might not be able to pick up. So use the right word for what you're describing. And you never want to include any types of photos or graphics in your resume. Now, I know that there are certain positions like, marketing and graphic type positions that some of you might be applying for. And that's a little bit of a different resume where you might want to include more creativity, but your standard resume should not have any type of photos or graphics. Avoid too much information in your resume. Just going back to what I talked about, the word is concise. And then any slang terms. I know when I review a lot of resumes that I'm constantly changing words that are more slang in nature and putting more professional words in the resume. And then the last is making sure that your resume isn't too lengthy. Your resume should really only be 1 to 2 pages. Anything more than that, then people are going to stop reading it. So try to keep that resume to 1 to 2 pages.
So Susan, you just gave some great advice about the length of your resume. I know you had mentioned to limit it to 1 to 2 pages. How do you recommend keeping it to that length, especially as you gain a lot of different job experience?
Yeah, that's a good question, Brandy. And, at some point in your career, you are going to start eliminating jobs off of your resume because you're not going to include everything. If you're in your career for 20 plus years, for example, there's going to be a lot early on in your career that's not going to show up on your resume. And so that's really how you keep it to the 1 to 2 pages. For most of the student athletes just starting out, they're going to have a 1-page resume, maybe getting into 2 pages. But certainly, this is a time, even starting out in your career, to evaluate what you want to include. So, for example, that summer camp position that you might have had, that might be eliminated now from your resume, even starting out right now in your career, because it just isn't relevant, and you have other experiences from college and leadership type experiences that you want to include, so you don't want to get too lengthy in that resume. So the key, back to your question, is you're able to keep the resume to that 1 to 2 pages because you really have to evaluate what do you include in your resume and what do you start to eliminate. And the easiest way, include everything in your first draft and then start thinking, okay, what can I start to remove from my resume so that I can keep within that 1 to 2 page. All right, that concludes about resumes. So we're going to switch gears now to cover letters. A cover letter really is your first impression. So before anyone reads the actual resume, they're going to read your cover letter. So that's your front door. So you want to make sure it's a good first impression to encourage them to move on and to read your resume. You also want to make sure in your cover letter that you talk about your experiences and how they relate to that actual job description. So again, going back to the key is looking at that job description. I talked about that when we were talking about resume writing, and you have to do that with your cover letter. Be able to relate to the job description through your cover letter. Now, your cover letter is not a review of your resume. You already have your resume. That's 1 to 2 pages that we already talked about. But your cover letter is different. And so don't just start writing your cover letter just as your resume, but it's just more or less in paragraph form. That's not good. And then your cover letter should have a lot of positive energy because, again, it's the first impression. Your cover letter wants to encourage me as the person looking at your resume to move forward and look at your resume and find out more about you. So lots of positive energy, and you can do that in your cover letter.
Susan, as you discuss cover letters, one question I have is how our student athletes can translate their athletic experiences, such as time management or teamwork that they gain as a student athlete, into job experience when they're writing their cover letter. Do you have any advice on that?
Yes, I do have advice on that. And actually, I can show you some sample sentences from cover letters that would describe exactly what you talked about, because that's a common question from student athletes is how do you illustrate kind of what they've learned as a student athlete in both the cover letter and in the resume. So on the screen, if you look, you'll see simple sentences. Now, certainly this is not a full cover letter. These are just sentences lifted from various cover letters. And going back to what I talked about, positive energy. I've underlined words that just jump out that are very positive and would give somebody a positive feeling after reading the cover letter and wanting to move into looking at this individual's resume after reading that cover letter. So many times you'll see cover letters that just start out with the please accept this resume as my application for whatever position. That sounds pretty boring. So you look at that first sentence, it is with great enthusiasm that I submit the enclosed resume as a formal application for. Sounds extremely different. And then getting into your question, the next, really the next three sentences kind of fosters that teamwork, illustrates that as a student athlete, what you bring to the position. And so without, reading those, you can see those on the screen, but that's really what you want as far as that positive energy coming off of the cover letter. It's the team involvement, the appreciation and understanding of being a student athlete and the commitment level that you have, and the compassion and positive attitude and professionalism that you have as a student athlete. And I'll also, and I'm going to jump back to resumes here for a second to answer this question, when we're talking about student athletes and the leadership skills that you learn as a student athlete and how you can include that in the resume, because I didn't talk about that earlier. But what I really like when I see student athletes who are trying to form the resume and they don't have a lot of experience, they have a section called leadership experience. So you have your work-related experience, but you also have your leadership experience. And that's where you can, convey all of the skills as a student athlete and all the opportunities you had on campus. So that might have been, involvement in student athlete advisory committee, community engagement, things like that. There's just a lot that a student athlete, until you stop and really think about it, you have a lot that you can place on your resume regarding your leadership skills and involvement and experience. Now that we talked about cover letters, let's just talk a little bit about references. The question always is, should you include references on your resume, or should you just have available upon request? Really, there's no right or wrong answer to that, whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, most job applications, you're going to be asked for about 3 references, and most job applications are online. So you're going to have to include that in the online application. And so therefore you wouldn't include the references with your resume. But if you want to have a separate page of references, certainly you could do that. I always would say limit those references to about 3, because that's what's the norm that's asked for. Or like I said, you could have just at the end of your resume, it could say references available upon request. The key with your references, make sure that these are individuals who actually know your work product. So these are people who you've worked alongside, supervisors, mentors, it can be even your professor, coach, and so on. So these are people that really know you as a person and what you would bring to the table for that particular position. Always keep your references up to date with what's going on with your job progression. So certainly always ask somebody to be your reference. Do not have them surprised by receiving a phone call for a reference. So make sure that you first ask them to be your reference and tell them that you're using them as a reference. And then as that is progressing through the the phone interview, the in-person interview, so on. Keep your reference up to date of what's going on. And then make sure that all your references, you have accurate information, title, and their contact information, that is the accurate information for them.
Susan, that's really helpful information. Speaking of your references, do you think it's beneficial to ask your references if they've received any general feedback about you?
Certainly, that does not hurt at all. It helps. There might be those times where those individuals cannot share that information, but it doesn't hurt to ask that question. And obviously, your reference is probably a mentor of yours, and so definitely I would see if there was any feedback from the person that was inquiring about you for that job, and that's definitely something that can help you grow. Now that we've talked about resumes, cover letters, and references, I don't want to forget about social networks. And you might be asking, well, why are we talking about social networks? Well, really, they're all connected, because I talked about this being your marketing campaign. So this is your personal brand. And when you're seeking employment, you are marketing yourself, and that is your personal brand. And your personal brand's out on social media. So when you're looking at your accounts, you don't have to have a social media account on every platform. But just have one really good, strong one, although I know many of you have multiple social media accounts. Make sure you use your real name, because you may have created your Twitter account when you were in high school, but that might not have been an appropriate name. So make sure it's your real name, because people are going to search you by your name. Make it professional. Keep your photo image professional, because again, this is your professional brand, and you want to be consistent throughout all of your social networks when you're seeking employment at this time in your life. And then place your social media profiles on all of your job search materials. If you noticed when we were looking at the resume samples, there were social media accounts on those resumes. You might as well put it out there, because if not, people are searching for you, and you don't want to be mistaken for somebody else. So make sure that you have your accounts on your resume. LinkedIn, everyone should have a LinkedIn account, because that is the very professional platform. And I would say next would be Twitter, making sure that that is remaining professional. So since we're talking about Twitter, let's just look at some Twitter tips that you can use. Make sure you look like you're actually using it. Be a thought leader on Twitter. I know Twitter might have taken on a different image for you previously, but now that you are looking at your future career, you really need to look at this as being something that is more professional. You don't always just have to have your own information on Twitter that you're sharing. Retweet other professionals out there that might be in your chosen career. Again, that goes back to being a thought leader. And then honestly, you can show personality in your Twitter or in your tweets. And then last is, follow those individuals who you would consider are major players in your future chosen profession.
I think many students have had social media accounts for an extended length of time. Do you think they should create a new account to start fresh with a potential employer?
Good question, one that really I haven't thought of. It's really up to the individual. If they feel like their previous account just wasn't professional, then yes, it doesn't hurt to start with a new account. I think the key here is just making sure that you're being professional with your social media platforms, because trust me, they're going to be looked at by future employers when you're going through the interview process. And so many times it's the social media that keeps somebody from even getting that interview, or post-interview getting the job offer, and you just never want that to hurt your chances. So, just be smart with it. I know that all student athletes are told that throughout their athletic and academic career. And it just means that's much more when searching for your future careers.
Susan, this has been so insightful, and I think I even learned a thing or two about my resume. I want to thank you again for the time that you gave us today.
Thank you, Brandy. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today. I hope this was helpful. And as you said, you learn from this, and it doesn't matter where you are in your career, you can always receive helpful information about your resume. So last thing, it's time to get started on your resume.